G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Nearly time for the outsiders. So we have Kevin Kangaroo and Fruit Cake. And they've come along to listen.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. Many thanks, Uncle Barry. Our final Outsiders for 2014, the team today. Professor of Economics at RMIT University, Sinclair Davidson, Paula Matthewson, a communications specialist, former Liberal Party staffer who tweets as Dragonista, and Greg Jericho, blogger on politics, sports and the arts, also writer for The Drum and The Guardian Online. Sadly, Peppa Pig couldn't be with us today. She's organising a lesbian separatist cake stall somewhere in Newtown. It's otherwise detained. Morning to you all.
Good morning.
Morning, Jonathan.
Let's begin, I think, with Holden, and we'll quickly move on to what that might imply. But it was a big week for General Motors.
As painful as it is to say, building cars in this country is just not sustainable.
If it was so easy to save Holden, why was the former government not able to deliver on its commitment? If it was so easy to save Ford, what happened under the former government? If it was so easy to save the motor industry, what happened to Mitsubishi under the former government? What we are going to do, Madam Speaker, is put in place the economic fundamentals that will give the manufacturers of this country the best possible chance to survive and to flourish.
I guess, Sinclair Davidson, is that last point, the putting in place the economic fundamentals that will let manufacturers survive and flourish.
Yes.
How good a job is being done of that?
Look, I think probably not a very good job, because our friends in Canberra have been playing silly buggers for a long, long time, and they like to play the blame game and pointing fingers and what have you. And if they came to the realisation that instead of promising of cutting red tape and green tape and blue tape and any tape you can think of, if they actually ever got around to doing it, of simplifying the tax system, cutting regulations, actually making it easier for business to flourish instead of promising to do it, things would be a lot better.
We're getting, Paula, aren't we, to that sort of crunch time where rhetoric has to sort of meet reality a bit in the policy sense?
Oh, I think we've got a long way to go with the rhetoric yet. And we've got, I know you want to speak about my EFO a bit later,
yes.
But we're going to have uber rhetoric next week. Look, this is really, aside from being the blame game, this is about the government stacking the chips against one of the things that they want to do next year, which is about crippling the unions. So we'll hear about Holden again next year, and we'll hear, not terribly truthfully, but that the unions will be held responsible pretty much for the fate of Holden and for the fate of the future productivity of the manufacturing sector, full stop.
You can see that. I mean, that hair's off and running already, isn't it? I mean, there's a fair bit of commentary around about the labour costs as part of the ills of car manufacturing and manufacturing more broadly. And I guess you can see, that there's clearly some sense and truth in that.
Well, you might recall that George Wright, the Labor Party secretary, said at the traditional post-election speech at the press club, when he was asked about work choices, he said it won't be about work choices this time round. It'll be about crippling the unions first, and then they'll look at crippling workplace conditions, but unions first.
The new version will be called Work No Choices. And, Greg, one of the interesting things in all of this, and I think it's one of the successful elements of this from the point of view of the government, is beginning to turn the general narrative around the issue of industry assistance. I mean, I think they've had there's a change of view, I think, following Holden on that.
Yeah, possibly. It was a very interesting way the government played the politics. Clearly they were smelling the wind, as it were, and a couple of weeks ago started leaking to Chris Yorman of the ABC that Holden were going. And it was all done in a very odd way, given that there's now a productivity commission into the automotive industry, which the government set up supposedly for certainty to the industry so that there would be this evidence-based policy going forward, where it seemed to be very much this week about we're not even going to wait to that point, let's jump in right now. And it was while Tony Abbott was off at Nelson Mandela's memorial service, it was a fairly angry government. Joe Hockey and Warren Truss were pretty, as I wrote for the SBS website, very hairy-chested about, telling Holden basically, you're either here or you're not, which is a very strident way that I don't think anyone would have expected the government to take that kind of tone, whether or not they would have actually taken the position of, there's no more money in the till to give you, but it was accompanied with that tone of almost, we don't want you even here. It was a very odd sort of way of going about it.
I mean, it's interesting there, Sinclair, is how much of that is directed externally and how much internally, and the Grain Corp thing upset a lot of people within the coalition who then began to destabilise. As Greg says, there was this orderly process around.
Yes, I think there's conversation for internal and external consumption. And a lot of what happened around Holden was around internal consumption, because my understanding is there were elements within the coalition who actually wanted to continue pumping in more money. And I think it's probably a good thing that Hockey held the line and actually said no more money. We shouldn't really be giving industry assistance to almost anybody. And Greg wrote a nice thing in The Guardian just this week on sort of just laying out how much money it actually is and who gets what.
There was an excellent graph count in that one, I thought, too.
yes. Very interactive. I enjoyed that. But yes,
there is a lot of money about.
There is a lot of money, and more or less, as my good friend John Roskin was saying, companies that spend more time lobbying governments than trying to satisfy customers should go out of business.
Let's move on to MyEFO, because our time's a little compressed today because of the looming First Dog Christmas special, which I know you're all going to be riveted by. MyEFO early next week, in this week, and we've seen, it's funny how predictable the process is in these things, Paula. We saw, of course, the entirely predictable stories on the weekend papers about deficit and just how bad things were going to be, and some taxes that couldn't be raised, and the scene is being rather effectively set.
Absolutely. So the government basically wants its cake and eat it in putting out MyEFO very close to Christmas, so that whatever is said, basically Australians will forget about as soon as they switch the television to the cricket. But in that split second of attention that will still be applied to political or any hard issues in the week to come, it will all be Labor's fault. So this is the traditional post-election, we found a black hole and it's their fault and we have to do bad things to you, as in raising taxes and cutting expenditure, because it's the other mob's fault.
But the black
so that's
hole
what next week is about.
Well, the black hole, the period at which the other mob might be blamed is sort of running down a little. And Greg, it's been interesting that MyEFO's been held out till Parliament's packed up and gone home, till the attention is lifted somewhat, as Paula suggests there, from this sort of tough economic stuff. It's curious because clearly the government wants to build this story of difficulty with the budget. This is going to characterise this coming year. It's curious that it's to get pushed back so far and be done so much on the quiet.
Yeah, well, I think it's, as soon as we heard that MyEFO was going to be coming out this week, the whole threat that Parliament was going to be sitting this week was certainly null and void. That was never going to happen. I mean, it's the old days, with the budget black holes was Bob Hawke and Paul Keating almost basically the day after the election pretty much coming out and saying, well, we've got the bad news. Now it's taken them, 3 months to supposedly find this hole, which, is a fairly well-disguised hole then. It'll
They'll
be...
have had to do some digging themselves to
exactly, and that's what it's going to be. I mean, it's all about saying the Labor didn't really leave us a $30 billion deficit. It's $50 billion. That seems to be the figure they're going for now. A lot of it's going to be cost shifting. I was sort of thinking it's a bit like Labor decided to buy a lounge suite and do it over a 4-year interest-free plan, and Joe Hockey's come in and said, no, we're going to pay the money all up front, and claiming that is somehow a black hole. It's not. It's just that this, with the Reserve Bank, for example, with the $8.8 billion, essentially Joe Hockey said, I want to pay that all up front. It's a one-off payment, so straight off the bat, he's $8.8 billion better off next year because he's not going to be paying that money. So it's, you know, there will be, for me, the interesting thing about MyEFO is looking at the projections, the economic projections. Are they taking a very pessimistic line, as I suspect they might, on things like unemployment and growth and so forth? That's what I'm sort of going to be looking at rather than the actual big figures, because it's going to be a lot of political cost shifting.
Well, where the politics and reality meet is interesting, Sinclair, because with the budget and MyEFO, as with Holden, we have sort of political moments, but we're looking for the deeper sort of policy narrative there as well.
Yes.
We might have a black hole, but can we, within the budget, start to grapple not just with the atmospherics of that, but with the true structural issues?
The story always is how are we going to get back into surplus? Wayne Swan tried to tell a whole bunch of stories around there, could never quite pull it off. And now it's Joe Hockey's turn. When the MyEFO comes out, there has to be a plan back into surplus. And their audit commission has got a 10-year plan, which is totally unacceptable. So it's really up to people putting the pressure on Joe Hockey, because it's all very well blaming the previous government, which I'm a big fan of that, but at some point the black hole becomes your black hole. And 3 months after the election, it's definitely Joe Hockey's black hole, and it's certainly Joe Hockey's job to fix it. So we want to hear how you're going to fix it. Blame game, yes, that's all very nice, but where's the money coming from? What are you going to cut? Where are you going to spend? And tell us that story, and tell us a credible story.
Which makes, Paula, the politics pretty ugly in prospect for 2014. If you've got the Audit Commission saying, well, 10 years is realistic, as Sinclair suggests, that's not perhaps necessarily a politically palatable alternative, and yet the prospect of making the cuts to bring the budget to surplus quicker is a very ugly thing politically.
Oh yes, we can expect lots of ugliness next year. Remember the line that Labor used during the election campaign that Campbell Newman was the entree, excuse me, and Tony Abbott was the main meal. I suspect we're going to be seeing that menu next year.
Not many of us may survive until dessert, I suspect.
Yeah, well, dessert is the run up to the election, and I mean it's a time-honoured tradition to get all the nasties out on the table in the first year.
Which is where it's interesting that the government has chipped away at so much political capital this early that you would want to use that in your very, very tough first-year budget, but
maybe thought so.
Yeah, not on grain corp. You want to be using your political capital on the budget.
Yes. I mean, does that, do you think, Greg, make some of the budget decisions that much trickier, that the government's already starting to look a little bit, well, not unpopular, but the polls aren't good?
Well, I mean, this is the problem that Labor always had, is that they thought that political capital was something you could store and it always stayed there, and they didn't realise it actually can evaporate just by you doing nothing. And you think of Paul Keating, where he was very much the view, you got political capital, you use it, and if you use it well, then it'll build up again.
But it's that thing of using it well, isn't it? And we've still got to see that sense of direction.
Exactly, and I think we're going to, next year's sort of budget story in terms of the politics very much does start and hinge a bit on MyEFO and whether Hockey is able to blame the deficit, the $50 billion deficit, on Labor, or whether people see that as being a bit of a con, because he's clearly setting up this huge deficit, meaning we've got to do something to fix it, so the budget's going to be nasty and it's all Labor's fault. Now, if they can't sell that and can't sell it credibly, then they're going to struggle. So I think that's sort of where the politics is all going to be laying.
Well, it lies before us, and all this will be revealed in fairly short order. MyEFO on Tuesday, the budget, of course, to follow. Thanks to our outsiders this morning. Greg Jericho, you just heard, writer and blogger. See him at The Guardian and other places. Paula Matthews, corporate communications specialist. Paula Matthewson, I beg your pardon, Paula. I don't know why I read that, but I did. And economist Sinclair Davidson. Sunday Extra, Jonathan Green with you.